the way that we got into this in general was our parents were amateur genealogists back in the day. Okay. But what they did the most that we remembered growing up is they used to drag us to cemeteries all the time, and they're taking pictures of tombstones for their genealogy and their work in genealogy. So, I say that they really kind of helped set the stage here for how we did get into this kind of storytelling and this ghost stuff, because at the end of the day, we really like cemeteries, and our parents were the ones that instilled in that.
Welcome back to the Describe Your World podcast. This is episode 14. I'm Travis, and I'm with my guest, Brandon. I'm going to take a stab at your name, and if I get it wrong, I apologize, but we talked about it prior. Schexnayder.
Schexnayder, that's right.
All right, sweet. So with Brandon has a podcast called Southern Gothic, and he's an expert in all things narrative storytelling when it comes to the supernatural, spooky, legends, myth, things like that. So I definitely want to give him a chance to kind of talk about what he does and what he's passionate about too. How are you feeling, Brandon?
Man, I'm doing great today. How about you, Travis?
Doing great. I'm excited. I'm excited because both storytellers, both passionate about history and all things creative and audio and all kinds of things like that.
Both Southerners too, right?
Southerners too. Yeah. Born and raised for me, South Carolina, and you're New Orleans, right?
Yeah. New Orleans born and raised.
Nice. So we got a lot in common.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm excited, and normally what I do is I'll kind of just introduce my guest, and then at the end I want to save time to kind of let you shout yourself out too. But to get things kicked off, if you will just talk about your early life, upbringing, family, education, anything that's relevant to who you are.
Oh man, there's so much there, right? But like you said, I'm New Orleans born and raised, so that's kind of ingrained in me still to this day. Families from New Orleans. Way back, that Schexnayder name goes all the way back to the 1720s in New Orleans. So, the family's been there for a long time, lived down there, lived out in Jefferson Parish, went to school at an all-male Catholic high school, because there's nothing more New Orleans than that, right? Going to a Catholic high school. And,
right.
Went through that. And when I turned 17 and graduated high school, I moved to Middle Tennessee. That's where I am today, and I've been here for about 20 years now. Went to Middle Tennessee State University, got a degree in music production technology. Ended up on Music Row making records. Working in studios, working in recording studios, and recording a bunch of country artists, folks like that. Of course, learned a lot about storytelling from real songwriters, from guys who were doing this all the time. A lot of these old country folk, things like that, and I've just had such a passion for what goes on between two earbuds, right? I'm just so passionate about audio, about storytelling, about, just the pictures we can create in our brains without anything visual. And that's really what's fueled a lot of, what's going on in my life and everything, for sure. So yeah, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. I heard a lot of things in there that I want to kind of touch on, but we can work our way through. So all male Roman Catholic high school or college?
Yeah. High school. I mean, I went to a public university. I went to Middle Tennessee State in Murfreesboro. Okay. So that was a big school, a big school, all kinds of different stuff. But yeah, I went to a Catholic high school, and that's kind of, it's fairly common in New Orleans. New Orleans is a very Catholic town. It goes all the way back. I mean, it was a French and Spanish colony forever, and it's just kind of lingered on. There's a Catholic church on, every half mile on a road, you're going to hit a Catholic church. So, so I went to all male Catholic school run by Jesuit priests and, in a uniform, the whole deal. And now, as you can see today, I have not cut my hair since I graduated, 20 years ago, over 20 years ago at this point, not to date myself, but yeah.
So is it, so was Roman Catholicism something that was just a part of your family, or was that just sort of the way things went?
Yeah. It was it's definitely a part of segments of my family, but it was just as much culturally Catholic as anything else, if that makes sense. It was such a part of, the fabric of New Orleans, even Mardi Gras, right? Even Mardi Gras itself, that's a Catholic celebration, that's meant to be, it's Fat Tuesday, right? So it's the day before Ash Wednesday, which kicks off Lent, which is supposed to be our 40 days of preparing ourselves for Easter, right? And so Roman Catholicism is just it's so ingrained in New Orleans culture I mean, the celebrations, everything all kind of go around that. So it's definitely a part of it. Definitely a part of how I came to what we do now. In New Orleans itself, and the culture down there is certainly a big influence. Growing up down there is definitely a big influence on what I do today, for sure. Yeah.
I wonder too, because my wife and I spent a little bit of time down there. We spent 2 days there during our honeymoon. We really sort of did a tour of the South, and we started in North Carolina, made our way up to Tennessee, hopped over to Texas, and then circled around. And so we ended up in New Orleans for a little while. But there's just so much, even sort of at the tail end of the pandemic, sort of like a spirit of, community and music and noise, sound, lots of like, even like in the middle of the night, there were people out and doing things. So it's very interesting because where I'm from, it's extremely quiet, extremely isolated, nothing special happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a different culture for sure. It's so laid back. It's so comfortable. It doesn't feel, when I go home, I don't feel like, I don't feel the pinch of keeping up with the Joneses or anything. I don't feel, any of the kind of pressures that I do where I live now. I feel like, you kind of can, for lack of a better term, let your hair down, right? When you're in New Orleans, it's very laissez-faire is what they call it. Just let it be. Laissez le bon temps rouler. I mean, that's the motto down there. Let the good times roll. It's I love it down there. I don't know if I'll ever live down there again, just by way of, raising my kids up here in Tennessee now and having their roots being in Tennessee. But it definitely, that mentality and that feeling, it's like as soon as you cross into Louisiana, southeastern Louisiana, that humidity just re-ingrains itself in you and you feel like a different person again, so it's something definitely, I miss that vibe a lot. It's a whole other place. It's hard to even describe to people what that's like, especially growing up from there. It's such pride even when you leave. I still can't change my area code. I haven't even lived there for 20 years at this point, right? My phone number is still a 504 number. And it's I think my sister, I talk to her all the time about, she's my business partner on with Southern Gothic Media, and she still lives down there, and we talk a lot about if she would ever want to move up here, and she just won't leave. And I have a lot of friends who are like that. They it doesn't matter what happens, they're not going to leave New Orleans.
Yeah,
and I don't blame them. I don't blame them at all. But yeah, it is a very intoxicating place, for lack of a better term. Yeah.
I have to assume that because you're from New Orleans and you grew up in that area before you moved to Tennessee, I have to assume that the music and the legends, the stories were all part of your, formation and who you are. What were your interests? What were you into when you were younger?
Sure. Well, I am an avid camping and hiker guy. Okay. So I as a teenager, what drew me to Tennessee, what drew me out of New Orleans more than anything, was that's what got me out of it. So living in Tennessee, coming up here at 18 years old, I could be in the mountains every weekend, an hour and a half, so that was really kind of that was the draw away from New Orleans. Cause you go camping down there and I mean, you're swatting mosquitoes in the swamps, man. There's no outdoors, unless you're out on a canoe or something and you're in the humidity and you're sticky. They just ain't got that down there. But, as for the music and all, I mean, absolutely, that was just, New Orleans, it was growing up where a place that had such culture that was so ingrained in people like that, you can't help but take that as a part of you. And it's not just family culture. It's not just what your family ingrains in you. It's what the entire community ingrains in you, and feeling that. And, the city itself is so steeped in this awareness of itself at the same time. It knows it's different. It celebrates the differences, which is a big deal, when you come to some of these other places. And, where I live now, it's Franklin, Tennessee, and it's an old Civil War town, there's a battle here. It was one of the final battles in the Civil War, incredibly bloody battle here. And it's a small, beautiful Southern town. And people like to come here and say it looks like a Hallmark movie where I live. But what's funny is that this is where Hallmark movies actually get filmed. It's that kind of downtown area. It's the beautiful square, beautiful Main Street. It looks Disney World Main Street type, right? And but yet it's different than New Orleans. It's awareness of the past, and it's awareness of its kind of its character and its life and all is very different. It doesn't celebrate how different it is. It celebrates kind of how special it is. And New Orleans is almost wants to be, not special, but us. Like it's not even comparatively. It's kind of the feeling when you come from there. So yeah, man. I mean, it's definitely affected our love of history, my love of history. Obviously there's the music and all of that. That felt second nature for sure. The desire to just, continue to do that. No matter where I went, it was definitely the city for sure.
What is it about audio that you're so passionate about? Because obviously you're audio engineer, you study music. So what do you think it is specifically? Is it more of like sort of a perfectionist kind of thing? You just want to make the sound as good as possible, or do you just love sound and music in general?
It's like a painter. I mean, I'm going to sound really pretentious here, and my apologies. I had, when I was really younger, I think I got into playing instruments first, right? And got into playing guitar first, probably at about, I think it was 10 when I got a guitar, and started getting those little pedals and stuff, and you start just kind of messing and making noise and finding different things that are cool and enjoying stuff like that, and being creative, and finding that I leaned less towards the musicianship and more towards some of these kind of, kind of sounds and the technology around it and all. Like that seemed to be more what I was interested in. But I'll tell you, the moment when I realized how powerful audio was now this is, I'm almost 40 now. And so this was, we're talking almost 30 years ago, and being that young, I had gotten, as an early teenager, I had saved up money and bought these two tower speakers. Okay. And it was part of like a Christmas present, even, to get like a stereo system. I was so into music, and I wanted like one of those stereo systems. And these two, I think it was a 5-way speaker. So, you have the tweeters, and it kind of gets bigger, and it gets, so it's the tower, right? And it goes up. And I was into Pink Floyd. Okay. And I was listening to something like Dark Side of the Moon, and they have all these filter sweeps going on. And I was sitting there in between the speakers, just getting lost in all of these weird things going on. You listen to Pink Floyd, and there's all these nuances, and there's all these, picturesque things and everything. And as you're sitting there listening with these filter sweeps, it sounds like things are walking up and down the speaker. So it wasn't even that. And it was in those moments that I started to realize that, the way our brain and our ears interpret things, again, we can put 2 earbuds in, we can put 2 headphones on, and we can do things with sound that give you a 360-degree picture without a surround sound system, and it can take you to places, and it can hit imagination in ways that, a visual might not be able to. And I tell people, like, what your brain can do when it gets these hints. If I were to play something for you and say that, I were to play sound effects for you, and I were to give you a really, let's say I want you to feel like you're canoeing down a river, right? And if I were to go out in a canoe, and I were to take my little field recorder and put it on my lap and record what it sounds like when you're canoeing in a river, and you listen to it right now, you might be a little bored. You might not think it's that cool. But if I sit down and I take all these different sound effects and I layer them in a certain way that none of them are even recorded outside or anything, but they all create this suggestion of what it actually feels like to be out on a river canoeing, it can just make your brain come alive, and you can feel like you're there. And that art and that palette is really what kind of drew me to it. Kind of coming out of Pink Floyd and coming into all this kind of stuff like that. But I was very fortunate in my career on Music Row to work with a lot of incredibly talented people who I learned a lot on how to do this and how to do that sort of stuff, and really trained ears to where I worked with people that I couldn't, they wouldn't let me suck. So I don't even say that like it's like I'm talented or anything. I mean it like, like it just was so beat into you. This is how it's done, and this is how you create these things, to where it's become beautiful. And I remember the first time listening to Radiolab. Have you ever listened to Radiolab? It was one of these kind of, it was one of the godfathers of podcasting. Okay. WNYC Public Radio and Jad Abumrad. If you listen to some of the old episodes, it was a radio show when podcasting came out. And he was one of the first people to experiment with storytelling in a different way. And he got a MacArthur grant and everything. That's how big of a deal. But they did this soundscaping that no one else was doing at the time, especially in podcasting. And it wasn't soundscaping that was meant to necessarily elicit a narrative like you're there. It was the type of soundscaping that would just elicit these feelings and kind of propel the story in certain ways. And I remember being in a studio on Music Row, and of course they had their big expensive speakers, and I was setting up one morning listening to Radiolab and just hearing all this nuanced stuff go on. And it was like, man, like that's how I want to tell stories. That's what I would like to do. And that's kind of the vibe that I've taken from there, at least. So long-winded, pretentious. I love speakers. I have speakers everywhere in my house. I love, anything to do with audio. I love sitting down and dissecting it. Everybody in my family hates when I watch TV because I crank up the audio, and I tell them it's like, do you watch a painting, or do you look at a painting from 50 yards away, or do you want to get up close and see all the nuance, right? So sorry guys, we're going to crank up the speakers whether you like it or not, and even while we watch TV, or a movie or something. So I've just been fascinated with audio. So anyway, there's the long story to how I got here, right?
No, I think it's really awesome. And personally, this is something we discussed prior, but I'm also a musician, sort of an audiophile. I love sound, and I'm also extremely particular about volume and how crisp it sounds, what brands make the best sound. I can't tell you how many pair of like studio monitor headphones I bought just because I want it to sound a certain way. I want to get every tiny detail when I'm listening. And the same thing is true for me. I have sound bars on both of my TVs. When we're watching, like, it has to have a certain like crunch to it. The bass has to cut through. And my wife just doesn't care. She's like, if I can hear what they're talking about, I'm good. And I'm not satisfied.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, but it's funny because when my kids will turn on the TV and it'll be blaring from the last time I watched, and I'll get mad.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. There's something about all the detail that you can get out of it. And it's more true as well. You were talking about instruments, and it's more true for me as a guitar player. I've been playing since I was 13. So I've been playing like 15, 16 years. And I am really careful about pedals and switches and amps and what sounds I can create. Even with like little 10-watt amps, I'm really particular. And so I can definitely relate to being particular and wanting to get a certain quality. And it's something you were saying about how you can hear like sounds like something's climbing or something's moving, like a phaser or all these little effects that cut through. And sometimes I want to know what those are. I want to know how they were created. So I could definitely relate to that interest in it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I went through a progression in my career in music where you kind of come in as a young man and you're trying to learn to make it perfect, right? And you're trying to learn to, to make these things the way that the greats made it, right? And then you do that and you learn this perfection and you learn all that. And then eventually you also start to learn something else that I think are nuances that are here, is you start to hear that the actual cool parts and the nuances are the human parts that are mistakes. Okay. And this is like the next level of as you're making it, because, we could go sit down right now and we could take a couple of git fiddles over here and we could have a jam and we could sing over it and I could tune the crap out of all of it, and we could put it on the grid. We could make sure we got perfect timing. We could do all these things and we could just absolutely slice and dice this bad boy into the perfect little pop track with no mistakes whatsoever. And, and that's got its place in the world, and I've done that for people and it works in certain scenarios, but, then you have somebody like, I don't know, man, if you, let's stick to the Pink Floyd just because we're here, right? You got a track like Wish You Were Here, which was just this classic track that they did. And it's him on acoustic guitar, and Pink Floyd is, notoriously, notoriously makes these beautiful orchestrated, albums, right? Studio albums where they are meticulous and they're spending days in there. They're spending the kind of days in there that folks don't spend days anyway. But they have this one track, Wish You Were Here. And it starts off with David Gilmour, who's, one of the best guitar players in the world, one of the most celebrated ones. He's playing this little thing and, this little lick, and they have it filtered out like it sounds like a radio, and it's playing. And after about 10 to 20 seconds of him playing, he kicks back in with a second one that's full frequency, kind of playing along, and they're going to play back and forth. And if you crank it up and you listen, you'll hear him snort. No joke. Okay. So basically you can hear him in the booth with the second guitar waiting for his part to come in, and just maybe hear him kind of, his breath a little bit. And then you kind of hear like a little, I mean, like, I don't even, and you hear that and it's something that, if I was making a record today with somebody, we might chop out. Right? Like we might cut that, but like if you have those speakers cranked, all of a sudden you feel this weird connection with David Gilmour because you feel like, wow, here's this guy. Like because I heard that little breath and that little thing, now I'm instantly picturing him in a booth with this guitar and I'm there, or at least for myself. Right. And so,
right.
Those are things you don't get until you really crank the volume. And, and those are things that are just wonderful. I mean, that stuff is everywhere, like Neil Young, he's got tracks where, like a chair moving in the middle of it, all these things, that they didn't cut out then that now we cut out. And, that humanity, man, is just, that's a part of it as well. So, again, I could go pretentious down the audio, wagon for forever in both directions, creative, not creative whatsoever. So, yeah.
Who is, I know you've worked with some pretty important people,
Sure.
George Strait, and I think I saw Loretta Lynn as well. Who's somebody that you worked with and maybe a personal experience you could share that kind of is a formative story for you?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate. I worked with a lot of incredible people, got to be kind of the young guy in the room with a lot of people who mentored me early on and kind of, got to see a lot of great records. I think George Strait there's a reason he's the king. I mean, he is, and it's not just his talent, it's his personality. He's just an incredible man. He's the nicest guy in the world, and was able to make, I believe I was on about 5 records with him, kind of in my earlier years. And, he's a pretty incredible individual and just a sweetheart. But I would say the time when I realized what true mastery of musicianship and what this kind of transcendent, what talent is, that, I absolutely believe talent's got to get cultivated, and it's got to, it has to be practiced, and it has to, but it's also got to be, you might come out into the world with this God-given ability to do it, but that's just potential unless you go and do something with it and you have this passion for it. And, but man, I had the opportunity to make some records and work with Leanne Womack, who's a country singer. I guess most people know her, the I Hope You Dance song.
Right.
She is very much loves making traditional country music. And the album that I was fortunate enough to work a lot extensively on with her was called The Way I'm Living. And it was nominated for a Grammy for Best Country Album. And she hadn't put out a record in years, and then came out with this record, and it was very country storytellers, very, very against the grain of what pop country was at that point in time. But all this to say that uh, I have such respect for her and everything, but the day that I realized what talent truly was the day that I was in the room with Leanne Womack singing and there wasn't a speaker between the two of us, and hearing what that voice sounds like, and without any amplification, just in the room and just kind of over there. Oh, hey, there's this person singing. And, she wasn't singing a microphone. She's just singing something at that point in time, and feeling I haven't had many musical moments that weren't so transcendent. Like it just, you knew this was God given. There was no other explanation at this point. There's no other this was, chill bumps, the whole deal. This was pure mastery and just pure talent, and so again, I'm not saying that means any other artist I work with wasn't talented in any way, shape, or form, but just her ability and her voice and the way that she shapes it and crafts it and understands it and all. At the end of the day, it's beyond even nuance. And being in the room and hearing that without a speaker was definitely something, incredibly eye-opening. So, yeah.
It's interesting because for me, and I don't know if it's something about us and something about similar people and who have similar passion, but I always prefer live music. And I sort of get disgruntled whenever I really like a band or like an album, and then I hear them play live and it's not very good. It kind of affects me in a certain way because I really appreciate the talent and I really appreciate the craft and the ability for an artist to really communicate their music. So, I kind of understand that, because not that I've had the pleasure of hearing her in person, that would be absolutely transcendent, but I do think that live music has a certain spirituality to it almost. It's almost like this, the universal language that people talk about when they talk about music. That's kind of where I feel that it's really in the live performance.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Look, I'm a studio guy, so I'm always going to go with records first. I will say that, there's something about, I view the two things as separate art forms even.
Right.
But I hear what you're saying for sure. It's definitely, there's nothing worse than going and not getting loving a band with the record and then going there and realizing like there's just no vibe to it whatsoever, So I've never expected a band when I go to necessarily play the album or do it in a way. Like, I think that these are two separate art forms in that way. But what I do expect is I expect whatever you get, I want them to be able to invoke a similar feeling in some way, right? Like I'm definitely looking for the ability for somebody to do that. And that's, but since I've kind of pivoted more into podcasting, I'm enjoying live music more now. I don't feel I don't feel like I'm sitting there as critiquing quite as much as I used to, for sure.
What do you, I guess it's kind of a loaded and difficult question, but I guess I'll ask it anyway, and I'll be unfair to you. If you had to throw like 5 of your favorite albums out that you would, as a person who loves the craft and the studio, like what would you recommend if somebody said, I just want to hear masterful music that's on a record?
Right. Well, hands down, I think that, Dark Side of the Moon is probably, to me, the most perfect studio album ever made. And watching how it was made. And I hate to, it's funny. I haven't even talked about Pink Floyd that much in probably a year until today, since we are diving into this, the way it's created and everything, and the limitations they had when they were making it. That's one. I would definitely go back to even, album wise, because of my age, there's a 9 Inch Nails record, The Fragile, that came out. That was a double record back when I was probably a teenager. And it was a very intensely made studio album. It's something that absolutely couldn't be recreated live. And it was one of those records that I remember riding on a school trip or something and having on headphones, and it just sounded like this stuff was going 360 around my head. He just had so many, it was so layered. It had so much going on, and, and musicianship and everything else, that definitely was an important album for me, and something I still enjoy. At the same time, like I said, I dig songwriters and all. So I am utterly obsessed with a guy named Anders Osborne down from New Orleans. Record wise, there's a few of them that I like. He's just a great songwriter, a great guy, all around guy. He's just been down there. If I had to pick one, I don't know if I could. He has one that was a living room, which he did ages ago, that just sounded wonderful and sounded really warm. And it was probably recorded on tape. But the big connection with him is he did a record right after Katrina. That was very, I don't think that there were many albums. I can't think of a better time capsule for emotionally what I felt after Katrina than what Anders put in this album. So probably one of those Anders Osborne albums would be one. That's what, 3 here. Man, I am oddly, after talking about live music, Guy Clark from out in Texas, his live albums, songwriter, right? This is old school. This is all the mistakes in the world, guys buzzing strings, the whole deal. Old man out of tune, kind of hemming and hawing along. It just elicits a feeling in me. We're even talking, how bad, if anybody out there's an audio, we're even talking DI'd acoustic guitars. This is, this is a not audiophile record, but for whatever reason, again, it invokes this kind of mood. You really feel like you're sitting in front of an old man storyteller. So that's probably in the queue there for me. Man, I'm trying to think. Shoot, those are, it's probably 2. Man, I don't know that last one, man. It could be anything from, oh gosh, as a teenager, I was in all that 90s, those 90s rock music, like the Smashing Pumpkins and, all that, but I don't know if I necessarily throw one of their albums up in there for that. I have a really good friend of mine that made a record. He's a songwriter. His name is Adam Wright, and he made a record called Dust. And this is a shameless plug as well, because I recorded the record, but it is this just masterful storytelling, songwriting, mixed with instrumentation, and it's just beautifully done. There's some string sections on there. It sounds beautiful. It just it kind of goes in the vein of the Mark Knopfler vibe of a studio record, but it's not for everybody. I tell people it's like going and having like a 10-course meal with a steak dinner. It's very thick. The songwriting is it's very dark. I think he only murders about 5 people in the album. It's very old school. It's got some old school kind of country vibe storytelling mixed with this just really modern playing. But it's called Dust, man, Adam Wright. And Adam's written a ton of wonderful, he's produced an Alan Jackson record. He's, written a ton of, his songs are all over the place, man. He's done a wonder for himself, but him and I share the vibe of, we're both, really into murder ballads and things like that. And he lives down here in Franklin by me. I run into him on the street every now and then. And of course we talk about Southern Gothic stuff, right? He's a big fan of Cormac McCarthy, and you get that from this record, and so I would probably, even though it's probably a little biased, I would throw that record in there with my top 5 for sure. Yeah. Adam Wright.
Yeah. And I guess, like I said, it's a little unfair because as people who love music, it's nearly impossible, because day to day my top choices would always change, and I hear something new and it'll fall into the queue or in the playlist. But one thing that's interesting hearing about Franklin, as you were speaking, I was like, I know I've heard something about Franklin before. There's something that kind of comes to mind, and what that is I believe Paramore is based out of Franklin. I believe that's where they're from. So that's where I heard Franklin.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, they're down in this neck of the woods for sure.
Yeah. So I guess my next question is sort of along the same vein, but I do want to transition into sort of the storytelling and paranormal stuff too. So for me as a musician, and I think I've heard this from other musicians too, but normally, when you choose an instrument and you start learning to play, or you are picking something out to record with or write with, it's a lot about feel. So like if you pick up a certain instrument, it might have a certain like vibe to it or a certain energy about it. And I could tell a number of stories of me picking up guitars at music stores and really regretting not buying them after the fact
Yeah.
because they felt so good.
Uh-huh.
Do you have an instrument like that that really speaks to you or just feels a certain way?
Yeah. I mean, I play guitar. I do all the music for Southern Gothic too. A lot of the vibe. I mean, some of it's, stock music, but the majority of it is meant to sound really swampy. Sound like, like we're sitting in a cabin out in southeastern Louisiana. So, guitars that sound like that for sure. I play, even though, I've went through school and was a jazz guitar and did all that stuff. I'm still, if I can go and drop D and it sounds dark and kind of gross, that's my guitar. I don't know why, kind of a boxy sound. If it sounds kind of like, I don't play like the dobro or slide, I've just never been able to pull it off. But if it sounds like it belongs in that camp, I mean, it just, for whatever reason, it feels like that's where I belong in that kind of, it sounds swampy. It's just the easiest way to say it. And what's funny is the guitars that I like the most don't record well because they sound so gross, I guess is the way you put it, where like when you're sitting around with it and you're playing on it, you're banging on it, and it's almost like, I play a lot of the way I play physically is, again, I'm not this masterful musician by any means. I play a little too heavy handed, which doesn't do well with recording or anything. It's very, a lot of noise so I like guitars that really kind of take it and they kind of, can do that. I have not been playing electric much in a while. I haven't really touched the electric in a long time, but yeah.
Yeah, I can say the same. My first guitar was an electric guitar, and it was one of those beginner, like similar to First Act, one of the like really beginner level guitars that my parents got me. And funny story, like some First Act guitars sound really good. So anybody who's listening or watching on YouTube, if your first guitar is First Act, could be a really good guitar still.
Oh man, yeah. Just because whatever guitar you get, I mean, they all have a purpose, and I have this guitar that my mother had bought when she was a teenager at a garage sale, and it sat in the attic of her house, or I mean, as a kid, even in the humidity of New Orleans, and it's still every now and then just has. Actually, it was on a Miranda Lambert record. Ironically enough, because I had it at the studio one day, and somebody was like, "Oh, this sounds really," and it's this weird little effect on something now, that every guitar has a purpose and has something, and don't ever beat them up for sure. Yeah, you might keep that guitar for the rest of your life, even if you get into guitars, even if you're buying Les Pauls and everything, right?
Yeah, my first guitar was a New York Pro, and it was a $100 guitar. I think it was like $108, and I still regret getting rid of it because it just felt so good. It sounded really good. Ended up getting another one later. It was a gift and different finish and everything. It didn't feel the same, but I'm still glad that I have one because they're really hard to find. But all guitars, like you say, have a place, and all instruments have some type of value. You just have to find the home for it.
Oh yeah, I believe that 100%.
I definitely contrast a bit though. I like brighter tones. I'm a Taylor guy. So there is some bass in Taylor, and Taylor is pretty good about like the expression too and everything. But yeah, I think I'm probably kind of out of your lane when it comes to that crunchy, darker, murky sound.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I just, it's probably just listen to all those swampy blues guys down in New Orleans, or even the metal down there is different. Even going to, hearing heavy metal down there, it was called sludge metal. It was slow and tuned down to like C, just slow, stoner metal or stoner rock is kind of what, most people would call it. But yeah, so.
What do you, are there any genres that you don't like or anything that you avoid listening to?
As I've gotten older, I just kind of, I'm not seeking out new music the way I would have otherwise. I understand now why parents are boring. I get that. It's kind of, I pretty much stick to a lot of the artists that I already know, and hearing that, So it's not that I avoid anything. I don't, I don't think I avoid anything, but I don't listen the way I used to new stuff. I'm definitely a lot less experimental. And now to say that, I have a 14-year-old and is definitely, all over the map in terms of stuff. And I do like listening to some of it. It's really, I feel like it's educational, really like listening and breaking it down and doing, um, but when it comes to my actual, enjoyment listening, it's mostly, songwriter types. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you like what you like.
Yeah. Well, it's like there was a long time, years, I wouldn't even turn on the radio in the car, just because it was like being around it at work all day, and since then, since being in podcasting now, I've kind of been in this world of podcasting for about 5 years now. I've kind of reestablished a little bit of now I do want to listen to music more often. And, because now now I have to listen to talking all the time, right? Now podcasts all the time. So, but it's not nearly as adventurous as it was when I was younger, for sure.
Well, cool. Is there anything else about like early life that you think we should revisit, or before we start talking about the paranormal and ghost stories?
Oh man, if you want a transition point, right? I tell people, a lot of people, when the canned answer, when people ask you how you got into ghost stories, again, my sister and I do this together. My sister's a researcher. She works at Louisiana State Museum. She's an archivist. That's what she does for a living. And the way that we got into this in general was our parents were amateur genealogists back in the day. Okay. And this was back before the internet and everything. This was back before ancestry.com. It was back before findagrave.com. It was back when, as children, they would drag us to libraries and looking at microfiche and all, and pulling up obituaries and microfiche. But what they did the most that we remembered growing up is they used to drag us to cemeteries all the time, right? So we're going up and down the Mississippi River as children, 10, 12 years old, in the humidity, and they're taking us to some cemetery behind some church where there's really only about 50, 50 crypts there, family tombs there. The big, above ground cemeteries like down in southeastern Louisiana, like you see in New Orleans, and they're taking pictures of tombstones for their genealogy and their work in genealogy. So, I say that they really kind of helped set the stage here for how we did get into this kind of storytelling and this ghost stuff, because at the end of the day, we really like cemeteries, and our parents were the ones that instilled in that, and my sister, seeing all that research, and that really is what drove her into being an archivist and this obsession with research. And, my parents really, she got that from my parents. Whereas, I got more into the storytelling and wanting to create, than she did. And it's been wonderful. Working with my sister, who I was not friends with as a child by any way, shape. We were 5 years apart. We never had anything in common, or never. It wasn't until we got older and found this. So yeah, man.
That's a crazy, I guess it's not crazy, but the fact that you got there because your parents took you to cemeteries is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it makes you comfortable in that, right? It makes you comfortable in this aesthetic. You're from New Orleans to begin with. You're hearing all the ghost stories. You're driving around down there. You go to the friend. All the kind of, the culture and all. And then on top of the fact that you're kind of just comfortable. It's funny. I'll go to any cemetery. We'll go to cemeteries all the time. I started dating a girl. And we, of course, if you're gonna date someone that tells ghost stories for a living, then you're probably a little strange, okay? And if she's listening, and within, after we had, gone out a few times or something, and she mentioned always wanted to go to the Bell Witch Cave, okay? And it's a infamous story, America's greatest ghost story, if you will, right? The Bell Witch up here in Adams, Tennessee. So we were going to spend an afternoon. We're going to drive up to go to the Bell Witch Cave and all. And we go up there. And of course, afterward, I'm like, well, I want to go and stop at the cemetery, where the Adams Cemetery, and go see, is that cool with you? Or is that going to freak you out? So we go to the cemetery. Well, I think after that, it spurred this thing where in the first few weeks of us dating, I think I took this poor girl to about 6 different cemeteries, just in the first month of, of dating. And, it has since grown. It has since grown into far more cemeteries than that. But, yeah, there's this fascination with, I tell people, especially when you're a storyteller, if you go to a cemetery, it's not just even the aesthetic. You literally have a lifetime of stories every several feet. The people that are there, this is a lifetime of stories. You can walk through a cemetery, and if you know the family names, if you know what's gone on in there, there's nowhere that has more life to it than a cemetery. And I say that, no life to it than a cemetery, no more than life. But yeah, it's so we kind of took that and ran with it, and now my poor children hate going just like we did. So yeah.
It's cool because it's kind of funny because in a lot of the bigger cities where we've done our ghost tours and ghost walks and things of that nature, they always sort of tie some type of cemetery or gravesite into the tour. And it just sort of happens because a lot of the families that were prominent in the city, they end up in the cemetery, and they are, directly tied in. So we always end up, and a lot of the times it's like unmarked graves. So they'll say, well, 1,700 bodies over here because, the main hospital was, 25 feet and there wasn't a place to put them whenever this disease came through, and so forth and so on. So there's something eerie about knowing that you're standing on a bunch of corpses, and that kind of starts that energy.
Yeah. It's wild being in there, and feels both, the reverence you feel when you go in, and just it's wild, it's wild. So we've really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Why don't you tell everybody who's watching or listening about Southern Gothic? Why don't you tell us kind of what inspired it, and what are they going to hear if they go check it out?
Yeah, well, as a podcast, what it is, it's essentially it's a storytelling podcast, right? We're telling Southern ghost stories, Southern legends, Southern history, and kind of the premise that we've come up with is we said, tell me the story that your mama told you, right, growing up, and we're going to go look up the reality around it. We're going to go look up the history. We're going to tell you what's the most common tellings. We're going to go, and we might even break it down, and look at it. So typically what we do in an episode, what you would expect is kind of a campfire type telling of what the legend is, and then you might hear that breakdown after it, and talk a little bit maybe about the context of the story. In some cases, what we find fascinating, it's a history podcast at the end of the day. It's very much a history podcast. It's on the history charts and all. We might break down, why did this story develop? And I think that that's something that's really interesting in the power of place, So if if I'm telling you a story out in the swamp, it might have certain elements to it that culturally tell you a lot about that community and all. So that's really what we love to do, is kind of go through, look at a story, tell the story, and then see how it's connected to the people who were there. And of course, what's true and false, sometimes, we'll call out a little bit of, inaccuracies here or there, but, it's a blast. I love telling ghost stories. I love visiting the places every chance I can get. I kind of, again, I come from this country songwriter crowd where just storytelling it's part of the deal. And it's this, it's a very active thing around here in Nashville, and it's kind of that Southern tradition. So I love nothing more. I mean, the podcast is wonderful, and I love doing the podcast, but I actually love nothing more than getting up on stage and telling stories. So it's definitely ghost stories, things of that nature. That's what you're going to hear. And of course, there's immersive, there's sound design around it. It is a narrative podcast. It's just my voice as telling you the story, and we'll have some sound effects and things to really kind of draw you in. Maybe creep you out a little bit, maybe kind of, pick up the vibe and the theme as we go through. So it's a little bit extra when it comes down to it, for sure. So yeah, man.
Yeah, I checked it out and previewed it a little bit, and I was extremely pleased to hear like the thunder and the sort of the dark and twisty noises that come in, and it really is immersive. It sounds like you're sort of dropped into the environment, and then you get to hear about the story.
Yeah, I think a lot about audio in a visual way, ironically enough. And, we're talking about how it'll surround your brain. And you think about if you were, my goal here was to say, most podcasts will kind of live in this world, narrative podcasts. There's something where I feel like for lack of a better way to put it, or like network television. Okay. So I'm friends with a lot of true crime people, right? Maybe we put, we might have this monologue, this narrative, true crime, that I'm going to read this story, this script, and I'm going to do a great job delivering it. And we might have, this kind of low level music underneath it, and we're going to deliver it that way. And it's well done. It's well written, deserves all the praise in the world. It's, but for me, what I think about is I think about like the first time you watch like an HBO series after growing up watching cable TV or, network TV, right? And you think about how, when you, the first time you might watch something, I don't know what's on, like The Wire or something. We mentioned why, or like The Wire's one where or Sopranos or something like that, right? Where the second that comes on, even the way the film looks, even the way that everything, you're inside this world. And you're going to know if I showed you a 5-second clip from, The Sopranos, just by the way, the grain of the video and, the background and the set and the way it's designed, you're going to know you're watching The Sopranos versus something else. And so knowing that aesthetic and feeling that, it's kind of something that I wanted somebody to feel or hear, is if you listen to a Southern Gothic episode, that the way that it felt while you were there, you felt like you were in my world for this 30 minutes. You're in this place that we created. And, and we could go down all the technical ways I do it, and did that, and the ways I made the choices to do that. But at the end of the day, that was kind of the hope here. So if, at one point I did make another podcast called Ghost Tour, and it was an interview type podcast that we did. We did one season. We just never got back to it. And we interviewed tour guides, did some haunted tourism tour guides, right? And it felt very different, and we made it very different, and it was very upbeat. And that was the point there as well. So anyway, roundabout, that's, that was kind of the goal. I want you to feel like you're in the swamp when you listen to this show. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm super curious, and there are a couple of things that kind of tie in, which I think are really interesting. But I'm super curious. Is there something recent that you've created, or a story maybe that you picked up to talk about that you're still really excited about, something that you can look back and you're really happy with?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's as recent, but we're obsessed with this one story. All right. And we've got a couple of them where we just can't let them go. So a lot of these stories, you'll hear something and, we'll tell the story, we'll kind of go through it and we'll figure out a little bit about it. It's fun. And then you kind of put it to bed and, and I can go and tell those stories at a show, or we can, share them. But there's a few of these that have so much life around them and so much context and so much there that like we can't. And, my sister, is being a researcher, it just opens these rabbit holes. And there's this one story. It is about a woman by the name of Julia Brown. And she lived down in the Manchac Swamp, right? It's outside of New Orleans. If you head west out of New Orleans on I-10, it's about halfway between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, the Manchac Swamp. And this woman lived down there in the swamp, and she was born an enslaved woman, got married and moved out there with her kids. And she lived in the edge of town, this little swamp community. It was all German immigrants that lived there, and they were basically cutting down. It was a timber industry. It was a very isolated community. You could only get there by a railroad or a pirogue, by water, a railroad. And it was hard to get in and out of this community. And she's living out there on the edge of town, and she becomes kind of this midwife, and she's practicing root work, possibly voodoo or some type of semblance of what that is. This is the early 20th century at this point when she's living out there. And then according to the legend, the story, at some point, her kind of relationship with the community started to sour, whether she felt like she was being taken for granted or, something was going on. Her relationship starts to sour with the community, and she just starts isolating herself out at her property. And folks say that she sat out there in front of her cabin in this rocking chair out in the middle of the swamp. And she would sing this song, "When I die, I'm going to take the whole town with me. When I die, I'm going to take the whole town with me." Right. And you can imagine the folks down there in this little town, how scared they were. They thought she was a voodoo priestess, right? They thought that she was practicing this root work that they didn't understand or anything. Now here's this old woman who's doing this. And eventually one day, of course, like everybody, she dies. And she dies of old age, as far as we know. She was up there in age, and she's made this curse. And so, they have a funeral 2 days after. 2 days later, they have this funeral, and the whole community comes out to the funeral. Everybody comes, and whether it's to like appease her soul or whether or not it's to just because she was a beloved member, I don't know. We'll never know what it was, but everybody's there, and little do they realize they're so isolated and have so little contact with the rest of the world. They don't realize that one of the most massive hurricanes in recorded time at this point is coming plowing through southeastern Louisiana. And they're quite literally documented in the newspaper at her funeral when the winds start to hit Frenier. And this is like a Category 5 hurricane. It was the 1915 hurricane of the West Indies. Over 400 people died that day. And this little town of Frenier, where she lived, was completely destroyed. Only 25 people survived and were able to get out of town. Massive destruction, all the day of her funeral, right after this curse. And so, so folks have talked about Julia over the years of whether or not she cursed this small town, if she's a voodoo priest, as a voodoo practitioner, all this. And we've kind of found, this was early 20th century, and we've become obsessed with this woman who, this was only about 30 minutes away from where we grew up. And, but there's so much documentation in the world where we've found census records on her. We've found her marriage certificate. We've found all these documents, newspaper art. There's an obituary of her. And this hurricane really did come through the day of her funeral. And this legend really has been passed around. And we've become obsessed with tracking when did it change? And over the course of time, and found a newspaper article from the 70s where a young girl who survived that day and knew Julia Brown and knew of her as a child, was asked was she a voodoo practitioner? And the girl said, well, she was so sweet. If she wasn't cursing the town. She was warning the town of what was going to happen. Right. And so we've been able to kind of track how this legend has evolved over time, and we're utterly obsessed with finding out more about who she is as a person. And I think that at the heart of all these ghost stories, that's what we think is the most powerful thing in the way that these tellings are and all is there's a humanity to it, and there's a reason why that they develop, and there's a humanity of the people who it affected. There's the people who don't understand why these awful things happen, and there's the people who are just downright afraid. And the emergence of all those things are what fire us up. And Julia Brown, and that story of Julia Brown is one of those, because it's recent enough to where we can really find who she was, and we can get this documentation. But there's no debating whatsoever the fact that these events really did happen. And this story really does check out. The most fanciful version of the story of her being this, it really does check out, because this town was utterly destroyed. So we're obsessed with Julia Brown. We have a few other ones that are similar to that, and some things like that we kind of get into. But that's kind of where we go at the end of the day, for sure. Yeah.
So one thing we discussed whenever we met earlier is, and I was fascinated by this too, is that, your stories are so rich, and you really focus on the history and the people and the setting and the culture, but you yourself haven't had a paranormal experience.
Right.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated by that, because you have this passion. I guess it comes from your passion for history, your passion for storytelling, but the actual ghosts and the spirits and demons and all of those things, and the things that creak in the night, those things really haven't bothered you.
No, not at all. It's wild. I tell a lot of people, I do some seasonal ghost tours here in Franklin. A very good friend of mine owns a walking tour company, and she does year-round ghost tours. And so when she gets busy, I'll go out there, and it's been a wonderful experience. It helped take my storytelling to the next place, because during the Halloween season, you're out there every night, and you are eliciting reactions from people who are bored. There'll be somebody's husband got dragged along on this thing, and you're trying to get that guy into this story, but coming from this landscape of haunted tourism and being involved in some of that, one of the things that I've learned and having all these friends who are ghost hunters and all this, is that we both come from everybody seems to come to the paranormal from two separate angles, right? You're either someone who's way into history and just found this part to be fascinating, the darker part, or you're somebody who's had experiences and that's how you got here, and those seem to be the primary avenues of it. And, I definitely came from that kind of that history, like I said, with genealogy and all, but enjoying, the cemeteries and enjoying this aesthetic. So that's probably, why I got here. Again, I mean, look, I was, I'm always been interested. I always loved the murder ballads and all that kind of classic traditional, type stuff, but I'm not a modern true crime person. And that's another part, that's kind of another element of, we seem to occupy the same space as a lot of that true crime demographic. Yet, for myself, I'm not really, modern true crime. That upsets me, if I listen to too much, really, true crime that way. So, that's kind of how I came to it. Now, in terms of everything, again, and we were talking about Julia Brown, the stories fascinate me, how they develop. That's part of it. I think, you learn something about a culture from their ghost stories and of their fears, in a way that you don't see in their monuments. Right. And, but I tell you, I was out at Waverly Hills last weekend, and, we went up to Louisville, Kentucky, and did a overnight ghost hunt. So, I mean, I go looking for this. Okay. I mean, I go, I love going out, and I love experiencing these places, because they're really rich with history. And, for anybody that doesn't know, Waverly Hills is this old sanatorium up in Louisville, Kentucky. And it was on the top of the hill. And back in the early 20th century, I want to say, 1915 to 1930, that kind of range. I can't remember exactly, so don't quote me on it. But this big 5-story sanatorium, this is where they brought tuberculosis patients. Okay. And, this was a disease of the lungs. And what they did was they thought that the best treatment for this was fresh air. And so it's on the top of a hill, and there's these big, basically there's these big long hallways where they would pull patients out onto these kind of balconies for them to be able to take in the fresh air. But of course, there really wasn't a cure for this at that point in time. And a lot of folks died there, and massive, I mean, and it was always overcrowded. Just all these deaths at this point. This was an epidemic at that point. They say that, population density and everything at that point in time, Louisville was having more deaths from tuberculosis than the Black Plague, or at least that's what the tour guides told us. I haven't fact checked that one yet, but so this fascinating property. And of course, a lot of legends have come out of it and all, and now it sits up there and it's entirely abandoned. It's in ruins. There's no electricity other than the parts of the people who bought it and put in some spots, for these tours. And so we went up there. We did we went up there at midnight and walked through this property, and 5 stories. They gave us a little tour, and then it was free reign, go ghost hunt. Some people brought devices, brought spirit boxes and stuff like that. And we did bring a couple of things to do, but at the end of the day, Waverly Hills is notorious for its shadow people. Okay. That's what most people talk about, is there's these spirits that just kind of will walk by, and they don't really, and they have this one that's called the creeper, that apparently the shadow person that'll creep up on the ceiling, and all these stories about this. So we kind of decided, once we kind of got walking through there, you know what, like, we're just going to go sit in some spots, and we're not even going to pull out the ghost hunting equipment. We're just going to, like, why, like, I don't want to interact. I want to see something. I want to actually, unfortunately we didn't. But it was like 20 degrees and like 3-4 in the morning, in this abandoned asylum. But so we go look for this stuff. I certainly do. I have a large part of my paranormal friends are all into ghost hunting and use the devices and stuff like that. And I'm still out there looking for a ghost, man. I'm still out there looking for that, that shaking experience, for sure.
I have 2 personal experiences that really cover those 2 paths that you talk about, the history part and the experience part. So And I don't know which you'll find. I'm sure one of them you're extremely familiar with, so it'll ring a bell. So when I was younger, I was in high school. I might have been in 11th grade, somewhere around there. But I woke up one night around 3 a.m, and my parents were asleep. And the way that our house was designed, 1,100 square feet, everything was open, very small, one single story home. But from my bed, I could look outside my door from my bedroom, and I could see the bathroom, and I could see my parents' room. And obviously, there's no door, like nothing, everything was just open, so I could see everything. So I woke up at like 3 a.m, and we always left the bathroom light on at night just because we wanted some light in the home. Everything else was off. But I heard shuffling footsteps in the house. I was like, okay, one of my parents is up and walking around the house. But I peeked through where I could see like their room, and I could clearly see both of them in bed. Like they were not up.
Oh yeah.
So I'm hearing noises that I can't associate with either parent. So I'm like, okay, the house is old. It's making noise. No biggie. So I kind of turn the other way and try to go back to sleep. But then I heard the spigot in the bathroom turn on. So I was hearing the water coming out, and I'm like, okay, now somebody's in the bathroom. Check again. Both parents still in bed. And it stays on for a couple minutes, and then it turns off. So obviously I didn't get up and explore. I kind of let everything be. But it was just creepy, and I might have been asleep, but at the same time, I don't have a good explanation for.
Right.
And then the other one, I was actually, while we were down in New Orleans, we were fortunate enough to have a really good ghost tour. And there's one story that to this day still sticks with me, pops into my brain at random times and just creeps me out. And it's Zach and Addie, if you're familiar with that one.
Sure.
Zach, they were helping people after the hurricane, and they were trying to make sure people had food and things like that. Zach ends up killing Addie and cooking Addie. And so it gets progressively worse from there. I won't go into gory details. Right. But we heard all the details. We saw the locations, and it just pops into my brain every once in a while. It just resurfaces. And both of those things just kind of keep coming back to the forefront, and just make me want to know more, just make me want to understand more about what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. You can imagine the power of place down there when you actually go to a place that one of those things happened, as recently even as the Zach and Addie story. I don't know. I tell people, I don't not believe anyone that ever tells me a story. I just haven't experienced it,
Right.
And I know as somebody who is in this line of work, and I'll do tours and get people come out, and I know everybody's weirdest day. Everyone always wants to tell me, you just, you're telling me right now with the experiences you've had, it can be the most clean cut looking corporate, whatever, will tell me his weirdest experience he's ever had in his life. And, it's fascinating. I think, 99% of the time, I think it's our brains filling in the blanks, and it's not actually something paranormal. But man, there's this 1% that people will tell you. There's 1% of these stories that just completely unexplainable, and just completely, and I think that's where it lives. And I don't know what it is. And, we can go in, any direction on theories of paranormal you want to go in. I'm fortunate enough, sometimes I'll get asked to talk to like anthropology classes, and I always apologize. It's like, look, I'm not stuck in one field like you guys are, where you talk about everything from anthropology. Like I can go paranormal. We can go any which way you want to, and make an explanation however we want to. And, there's so much there. And it's whether it's, psychology to anthropology, to just the way we interpret the world, to what actually might just be unexplainable. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, I tend to, because of my Christian background, I tend to lean into like the demonic side of things. I definitely believe there's a level of the universe and this existence that's deeper, that we just can't understand. And there are a lot of dark things out there that we can't communicate with or combat. And so, there are times when we can't explain why things are happening, and I'm totally okay with that, because I don't think we're meant to. But I've told my wife multiple times, one of my bucket list items is I want to go stay in the Conjuring house because because if there's anything that can go wrong, and if there's any evidence of it, that's where it would be. So that's my bucket list item.
Yeah, we were just looking at the Sally house recently outside of Kansas City, talking about going there. The guys, the Astonishing Legends podcast. I don't know if you ever heard that one. It's probably the biggest paranormal legend, or one of the, biggest in that. And they had started off doing their podcast. It had been around for 7-8 years at this point. And it kind of was meant, I think kind of the shtick they had was they had the skeptic and the believer. And they went and visited the Sally house, and the skeptic had an experience, so I've always kind of said, well, if there's anywhere, maybe it'll be the Sally house that'll do it. But there's so many places, there's definitely, I have a list a mile long on what to go to and what to visit. So, yeah.
Well, one thing that I like to do before we wrap up, I do it with every single guest, and it's always a lot of fun. I have a list of 10 questions, and these have all been edited for content, but they're loosely based on Inside the Actor Studio from the 90s.
Yeah.
So I always ask these 10 questions if you're down for it. And then after that, I'll give you some time to kind of shout yourself out, and we can wrap up.
Sure. Sounds good.
Sweet. All right. I always love this. This is always fun. It's kind of like a come up for air moment after we talk about like dark, deep stuff.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. What's your favorite word?
Spooky.
Oh, good one. What's your least favorite word?
Oh man. Can't.
Okay, nice. Yeah, nothing that's going to hinder.
Yeah.
What excites you?
Connection. Yeah,
okay.
That's one word. That's all you got.
What upsets you?
This goes in with my one negative word. I don't like limits. I don't like the idea of there being any kind of limitation whatsoever. And I'm not talking about rules. I'm just saying, I very much believe that, if you set your mind to it, you can do it. And, and limiting beliefs are something that, I think that we deserve to put away. So that's what I like the least, for sure. Yeah.
What sound or noise do you love?
Ooh, my kids laughing.
Oh yeah.
Hands down, my kids laughing, and belly laughs, big old belly laughs type. Yeah. When there's a really bad dad joke. Yeah.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Oh man. I don't know. Definitely can't take that screeching sound of the nails on a chalkboard. I'm definitely one of those people.
Yeah, I think that's probably my most common answer. I think 3 out of my 14 guests went for the nails.
It's always the nails on the chalkboard. I mean, I'm thinking of the Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street thing, but that or brakes, squealing brakes.
Screechy noises.
Yeah.
What motivates you to act every day when you wake up?
I mean, it's pure passion. It is wanting to not accomplish, that's the wrong word. It's wanting to create as much as I possibly can. I mean, it's not even a legacy. It's a matter of just, there are so many ideas on what I want to make. And if I don't wake up and start doing it, I'll never make them. Yeah.
3 more and we're all done. What profession other than your own would you like to try?
I mean, I've been fortunate to do everything I've hit my bucket list. I had a fantastic career, getting to do music, and then I kind of pivoted over. And as a kid, I always wanted to be a tour guide, and I've gotten to do that like as kind of a side thing, with giving ghost tours. I mean, if a career, I mean, I don't know. You ever see Josh Gates on Discovery? Mm-hmm. I mean, I want like Indiana Jones kind of vibe. Maybe that's what archaeologist, I think maybe that would be what I'd go with right there.
Be an explorer professionally.
Yeah. But I think less the ghosts and maybe more the old Mayan temples, right?
Yeah. You can go out, go look for Bigfoot. That's a fun one.
Oh man, definitely. I'm a Bigfoot fan. I'm a middle-aged dad. I love watching some Bigfoot TV shows for sure.
All right. What profession would you not like to do?
Sit at a desk.
Yeah.
Wherever it is. I mean, I do. Obviously, I'm sitting at a computer all the time making stuff, but I, if it lacks creativity or lacks the ability to connect with other people, I mean, that's why I tell stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I were, if it wasn't, I wouldn't be able to do that. I'll just put it that way. So, yeah.
If you, my inner English nerd coming out, my lit nerd, but if you love stories, definitely check out Bartleby the Scrivener.
Okay.
Short story, and it will 100% hit that point. Like, don't want to sit at a desk because bad things happen.
Yeah, totally.
And last one, and this is the most powerful one, the one that I like to ask: if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Hey, y'all! Hands down. I want to feel like I'm at home, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I want to feel welcome.
I mean, in all honesty, yeah. I mean, I would want it. He would have a Yat accent. All right. It would sound like New Orleans, because every time I get a dang phone call that has the 504 area code, I know it's the wrong number, but I want to answer because I want to hear somebody from back home, because that's what sounds like heaven to me is,
Awesome.
Hearing that accent, hearing that New Orleans. There's nowhere else like it. So that would feel welcoming for sure.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time and the conversation, coming on a podcast and talking to someone that we've only spoken a few minutes before. And it's very honoring for me to have someone come on with your experience. I really enjoyed the conversation. I thought it was a lot of fun. Hope you did as well. So before we close out here, I want to give you a chance to shout yourself out in any way you'd like to. Let people know how to find you, and then we will wrap.
Awesome. Thanks, Travis. Yeah. Well, again, I have the podcast Southern Gothic. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, I guarantee if you go in the search function, you can go to Southern Gothic and you will find us Southern Gothic Media. You can also go to our website if you'd like. It's southerngothicmedia.com, and you can kind of get a smattering there of some of the stuff we're doing. We're also on Instagram, of course, and Facebook. And we have a Facebook group, a private Facebook group. So if you want to get a little bit deeper into stories, or you have some stories of your own, love it if you come in or share pictures or anything like that. So again, southerngothicmedia.com, or any podcast app you'll find is Southern Gothic.